Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, I think we can start now. Welcome to this panel on climate change, threat to international peace and security. My name is Stephen Castle. I'm the Europe correspondent of the International Herald Tribune, and along with a number of my colleagues in Brussels, where I'm based, I wrote quite a lot about this subject back in March. Based really on a paper that went to a summit meeting of European heads of government on this issue, and it was a pretty sort of stark and blunt warning about what's going to happen to us if we continue on the current path. The more extreme weather events of the type that we're currently seeing in the United States, natural disasters, rising sea levels, droughts, crop decline, disease, strains on food and water supplies, increased poverty and social pressure in the third world, increased migration into Europe and other developed parts of the globe, and even a potentially dangerous competition for natural resources in the Arctic with Russia. Well, at the time that was front page news, not just in my paper, but in a number of papers around Europe. But we have a saying in Britain coined by former Prime Minister Harold Wilson that a week is a long time in politics, and 6 months is a very long time in the European Union. And as it happens, EU heads of government are meeting again in emergency session this afternoon, not to discuss this issue, but to discuss the crisis in Georgia and in Russia. And it seems to me perhaps that while the climate is warming around us, perhaps the political commitment to tackling this subject may just be starting to cool. Politicians seem more preoccupied with the more immediate security threats, while voters are naturally worried about the impact of rising fuel and commodity prices and the general economic slowdown. And I think for us today that presents a number of obvious questions. Whether that consensus in the European Union on the need to tackle this issue is as strong as it appeared earlier this year. How do we maintain that commitment during a time of economic downturn? What about other power blocs as well? This is an issue that affects the globe. What about the multilateral system? What is our hope of dealing with other blocs at a time when relations, for example, with Russia seem to be deteriorating by the hour? And are our international institutions, are they strong enough, are they focused enough on this issue to tackle a threat on this scale? I'm thinking here really of the WTO negotiations, which I attended back in July and reported on, which despite 10 days of negotiations got really nowhere. And this was seen as a bit of a test for the multilateral system, and the point was made that if those failed, then it would be much more difficult to get a deal on climate change. So, with us here to answer these questions and address other issues that you may raise, we have an extremely distinguished panel combining a wealth of expertise and experience. We have former and current foreign and environment ministers, senior diplomats, figures from international institutions such as the OSCE. I think you probably know the drill by now. They will speak for 6 or 7 minutes. My job is to try and gently bring them to a close if they go on beyond that period. I'll introduce them briefly before they speak. I cannot hope to do justice to their many accomplishments in the time that I've got, as we have to finish by 11:15, so I won't try. I'll give you a very brief introduction. We will then we'll move to questions, obviously. We'll start with somebody who probably needs very little introduction here, Dimitri Rupel, the Foreign Minister of Slovenia, whom I first encountered when he kindly allowed me to travel with him to Central Asia when he was chairman in office of the OSCE. And he later described this as one of the most difficult meetings of his political career. which I hasten to add was nothing to do with my presence there. But it was, his job was to gently raise the issue of human rights with the president of, then president of Turkmenistan, President Niyazov, a man who I seem to remember used to like changing the names of the days of the week and the months of the year, and renaming them after members of his family. He also had a loathing of beards. So despite his beard, Mr. Rupel carried off that mission with great skill and diplomacy, attributes he showed also during Slovenia's recent presidency of the EU, which finished on July the 1st, and during which, of course, that paper on climate change went to heads of government. So we're very much looking forward to hearing what Mr. Rupel has to say. I should just mention that he has to leave around about 10:45 to go to the summit in Brussels. So if you have questions, hopefully there'll be time for some questions after the opening statements. If you have questions specifically directed at him, maybe you could try and get in early. Mr. Rupel.
Thank you very much. Indeed, there are less and less people who doubt that climate change has effect on everybody's lives. We have gone through a very stormy period of our own. This second part of the summer here in Slovenia was rather difficult and stormy, and a lot of damage has occurred that was unusual for the expectations and for the usual behavior here in Slovenia. Slovenia, most of the time, has been a very peaceful and well, pleasant place during summer. Now this summer was different, and so climate change has penetrated. I would say climate change debate has penetrated more circles and more media and more public attention than at any previous time. Now, I try to be as brief as possible with these introductory remarks, so that we can have a relaxed debate afterwards. Now, Mr. Castle has already mentioned the Solana report that was produced during our presidency. It is a key European Union document. It's a document on the impact of climate change on international security issues. This was produced in March earlier this year. Now, this paper lays out threats that climate change poses to international security, gives some geographical examples of regions most or soonest at risk, and offers some suggestions and recommendations for effective response in this field. Now, experts emphasize the tendency of climate change to act as a threat multiplier, thus possibly worsening existing tensions in already fragile and conflict-prone countries and regions. Its consequences, among which is the increase in severe weather patterns, leading to a larger number of humanitarian emergencies, shortage of water on one hand, floods on the other, leading to food insecurity, economic weakness, political instability, and increased migration. Now, all this affects the interests and survival of countries in the international community. Now, to understand the possible effects of climate change on socio-economic, political, security, and or development situation in more vulnerable states, we need to address the so-called consequences of consequences. Some of the regions in the European neighborhood, northern regions of the African continent, the Middle East, Central Asia, will be among the areas most affected by climate change. This could also affect the stability of the European Union, so it's not something which is far away. It is because of such realizations that climate change is increasingly becoming a prominent category in national and international security doctrines. Now, the goals in our fight against climate change, mitigation and adaptation. Now, they can be achieved with the aid of technology transfer and, of course, financing. Adaptation to the impacts of climate change has to remain a high priority. All countries will be faced with the consequences of climate change, but as I have said, and as has been written and said, those least prepared for these changes will suffer the highest price. So it is crucial to mainstream climate change into development cooperation plans and programs, or else the achievement of Millennium Development Goals will be jeopardized. Now, the European Union, let me conclude, is due to its leading role in development and global climate policy, as well as the instruments it has to its disposal in the field of conflict prevention, crisis management, and post-conflict reconstruction, in good position, in excellent position, to lead the response against the impacts of climate change on international security within the international framework, through strengthening its own mechanisms, relationship or cooperation with its strategic partners and other third countries. By doing so, the utmost will be done in contributing to the common goal of building a peaceful, secure, and sustainable future for us all. Now, climate change, it's a complex global issue that can only be dealt with efficiently at the international level. All global partners have to cooperate in an active and constructive way towards this common goal. Now, this rather old but catchy phrase, act locally and think globally, is very much in place. Only a joint and holistic approach in the framework of a multilateral action can offer a satisfactory answer. We don't have much time. In December 2009, we shall have a Copenhagen conference. This will be of key importance, especially in view of the post-2012 agreement, and no solution to this issue will be successful without a complete engagement of the international community, entire international community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Admirably brief and to the point. Excellent, thank you. Next we have Mr. Marc Perrin de Brichambault, who is Secretary General of the OSCE, the world's largest regional security organization, one of course that includes Russia. He's held a string of senior appointments in the French administration, both in Paris and abroad, including, I think, Principal Advisor to the Minister of Defence and Director of Strategic Affairs at the French Defence Ministry. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's very hard to take the floor when Dimitri Rupel has just had it. What I would like to say is the following. The idea that there is a connection between security and environmental issues is not a new one. It was, in fact, in the Helsinki Final Act in 1975. And what is new, however, is that the intensity of the natural phenomena possibly linked to climate change has been on the rise and is creating not only a virtual relationship but a very concrete and practical one. I'm not going to repeat the conceptual framework which has just been laid out. I would like to focus on just 2 points which are more in the lieu of case studies. First, to say that the crisis has started. We are seeing it under our eyes, and I would like to focus on one case study which has been referred to already, which is Central Asia. As you know, Central Asia depends entirely for all its water resources on the water coming out of the Pamir Mountains, which goes into 6 countries, including Afghanistan, and is practically the sole resource for power, for irrigation, and for all the other users of water. The crisis there has been going on for some time. It was to a certain extent man-made. We all have in mind the consequences of intensive cotton agriculture on the Aral Sea, so I will not elaborate on this. What is new, however, is that recent climate trends may be linked to the climate change, but quite probably so, are changing rather radically the equation of life within this region. First, there are more extreme spells of both dryness and heat, and an overall diminution of the rainfall, which means that the amount of water to be shared among the countries of the region is shrinking. Second, the response to the current needs of development of all the countries is very difficult to combine. Upstream countries want to save the water in the reservoirs of their dams to have energy during winter. Downstream countries want irrigation in summer. And it is practically impossible when the amount of water is less and when the glaciers are melting. The glaciers used to have a regulatory factor, provide water in summer. This is not happening anymore. Therefore, we are now seeing, I will be by constitution neutral in all this, so I'll not use the names of countries, but we are now seeing definite threats coming from the downstream countries to the upstream countries saying, we want that amount of water by that date, and if we don't get it, we will go and get it. And please do not build any more dams because it is unacceptable for us. And the upstream countries responding by saying we need more dams, we need them for energy production, we need them to regulate the rivers, and we will build them whether you like it or not. The debate has already become quite sharp. There used to be a regional regulation in this whole area, which was provided by an entity called the Soviet Union, which provided the framework. This entity has disappeared. There is no new framework for regional cooperation, and currently there are no proper channels of dialogue. So do not be surprised if a water-linked crisis emerges in Central Asia in the close future. Second simple idea, we need the intellectual tools to address this situation. It is by definition complex because there are many factors which have to be combined. And I must say a first attempt has been made by international organization, by the UN Economic Commission for Europe, by UNDP, by NATO, by UNEP, and by OSCE working together, which is to develop regional focused studies called environmental security, ENFSEC, which try and bring together all the factors, what we know about the climate, what we know about the environment, what we know about the requirements, and give a coherent pictures with options in order to provide not only early warning, awareness, but tools for discussion, tools for action. Those documents have been produced so far for Central Asia, for the Dniester Valley. They are in the process of being put together by the Caucasus. So there's really a concerted response by the whole community of international organizations which have pulled together all their expertise to provide the tools to their different member states, participating states. What has not happened yet is to translate those tools into actually action-oriented debate in order to draw some conclusions, put common strategies, and create the framework. And I was very pleased that Minister Ruppel mentioned the efforts in the European Union in that dimension, because the European Union is trying to do that, for instance, in Central Asia, and has plenty of scope to do it in other areas. But it is clearly an open issue, and time is pressing. The time not taken advantage of now will be paid probably very dearly in those marginal, crucial regions where the crisis has already started. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. We now turn to Margaret Beckett, who's one of Britain's most experienced politicians. I mentioned Harold Wilson a few minutes ago. I think Margaret Beckett actually served in his last government as a minister. Since then, she has held a series of senior posts, including Secretary of State for the Environment, and before becoming Britain's first female Foreign Secretary, she is now Chairman of the UK Intelligence and Security Committee, which is an oversight committee of the intelligence and security services. Mrs. Beckett, we're very interested to hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much. It seemed to me from the beginning, when I first became involved in more detailed discussions on issues of climate change, that it was self-evident that this was a matter of peace and security. I suppose it might have helped that in the United Kingdom our meteorological office has, forever, been part of the Ministry of Defence, for what, when you think about it, are fairly obvious reasons. And I think that if you look around the world, there are other countries where there are similar links. And so, as I say, it's always seemed to me to be a statement of the absolutely obvious that it's a peace and security issue. But I want to pick up first on a point that you made, Stephen, because I think you're absolutely right. Many people involved in the peace and security world, less the military, in my experience, than many others, and many people involved in the world of diplomacy would really rather go back to things that they feel they can get their hands on, like the present dispute, for example, between Georgia and Russia. This is the stuff of the day-to-day. Yes, this is what we do. These problems arise. We try to sort them out. You want to talk to us about the future of the planet? Not today. And there is a real danger that people will think, this is a problem for our grandchildren. This is not a problem for our grandchildren. This is a problem for us now, we, the existing population. And yesterday, what resonated with me in part in those discussions was the number of occasions on which people said quite correctly, we saw this coming, this present dispute, which has led to the summit to which Dimitri and others will have to go. We saw this coming. We knew something like this could happen, and it's our failure that we didn't do something about it. This is true in spades of the issue of our changing climate. We see this coming. We know that it's happening. The Solana report, to which Dimitri has referred, is an excellent report. I would it's also quite easy to read. I would recommend it to anybody. But one of the key points that it makes, and that Dimitri very powerfully made, is that those who are most vulnerable to climate change are not only those least equipped to cope with it, they're also, in very many cases, in regions of the world which are already politically unstable and experiencing political difficulties. Mark talked about the area of Central Asia and some of the impacts there. In the Middle East, for example, in the wider Middle East, 5% of the world's population today have 1% of the world's water. About 2/3 of the Arab world depend for water on sources that are outside their own borders. Some of the countries that are already the most politically in the most politically delicate situations, already the most politically vulnerable, are at risk. And in particular, it's always seemed to me that water is absolutely the key here, and I completely share that concern. But what I think makes this something that we cannot afford to put on the back burner is that you can make these remarks about what is happening in Central Asia. You can say, as I have said, about the risks in the Middle East. In the Nile Valley, for example, the combination of sea level rise, salination of agricultural land and so on, perhaps the EU report points out, perhaps puts a couple of million, maybe more, people at risk of not being able to feed themselves in the way that they always have. I was talking to a colleague who was recently in Latin America. There are countries there who are dependent mostly for glacier meltwater, on glacier meltwater, for not only their agriculture, but for their economy. And that glacier meltwater is going. The glaciers themselves are disappearing in Latin America faster than anywhere else in the world. And what seems to me to be something that means we can't afford to put this on one side is that this is happening in all of these places at once. This is not something where there is a problem in Australia and then maybe in a few years' time there's a problem in Central Asia. There's a problem potentially in the Middle East. There's a problem in South America. This is a planet-wide concern and a matter of planet-wide impact. We had an unprecedented debate, and this goes back to the point that Stephen and I have both made about people's wish to tackle first things which seem more accessible and on an easier scale. We had an unprecedented debate in the Security Council on this issue as a peace and security issue, when, in fact, I was fortunate enough to be in the chair of the Security Council a little while ago. and there was considerable resistance to having such a debate. But when we had it, it was a powerful and an important debate, and it was in that debate that the representative of the Congo said, this will not be the first time people have fought over land, water and resources, but this time it will be on a scale that dwarfs the conflicts of the past. And it is the sheer scale, the potential, the impact on agriculture, the impact on economies, and the impact on migration, which seem to me to be challenges that we can't afford to put on one side. And so the question, we were all asked to raise a particular question. The question, it seems to me, that is very much before us is, can we in fact mobilise the political will, and can we then mobilise the economic resources to begin to tackle this question? The example of the Doha round is not encouraging. I have been saying for some time that one of the things which is a key factor in whether and how we tackle the issue of climate change, which is absolutely an issue of interdependence, is whether we are prepared to muster the resources which are needed on the timescale needed. And if you look back at the history of development as a whole, and if you look then at the Doha round, the omens are not good. But we have to make them good. This is not a challenge that we can afford to duck. And that is not, as I said before, for the sake of our children or for the sake of our grandchildren. It's because we ourselves, sitting in this room, are already beginning to experience these impacts, and they will not go away, and they will result in conflicts on a scale and of a kind that we haven't seen. And we really can't afford for that to happen.
Thank you very much. Next, we move to a serving Minister of the Environment, Nexati Jacobi of Macedonia. He, as well as being a politician, is trained as a surgeon, and I believe worked in refugee camps as well. So we're very interested to hear what he has to say.
Thank you very much. Okay, I took some lessons here about this problem, and let me share some positions of my country and of my ministry, and the duties that we have to do in the future. So the challenge of addressing effectively climate change has been elevated to the forefront of the international community's agenda, especially EU1, transcending borders and nations, demanding coordinated, strong and urgent response. We welcome the achievements of the last meeting in Bali and the adoption of the landmark Bali roadmap, launching an exclusive negotiating process on a new global and comprehensive post-2012 agreement by the end of 2019 in Copenhagen. We found all 4 building blocks of the Bali Action Plan equally important. We are fully aware that in order to effectively address climate change risks and to act accordingly at all levels, strong commitment and building of effective partnerships that will create synergy among all relevant national and international stakeholders, local authorities, business community, media, NGOs, etc., are of crucial importance. Of particular importance is financing of enhanced mitigation and adaptation efforts which require new and innovative concepts to cope with climate change in order to address possible significant damages. One of the most significant aspects of the impacts of climate change, which has unfortunately not received adequate attention from scholars in the social sciences, relates to equite implications of change that are occurring and are likely to occur in the future. In general, the impacts of climate change on some of the poorest and most vulnerable communities in the world could prove extremely unsettling. And given the inadequacy of capacity, economic strength, and institutional capabilities characterizing some of these communities, they will remain extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and may therefore actually see a decline in their economic condition, with the loss of livelihoods and opportunities to maintain even subsistence levels of existence. Peace can be defined as security and the secure access to resources that are essentially for living. A disruption in such access could prove disruptive of peace. In this regard, climate change will have several implications, as numerous adverse impacts are expected for some populations in terms of access to clean water, access to sufficient wood, stable health conditions, ecosystem resources, security of settlements. I consider that we, Ministers of Environment, have a great responsibility. On one side, we should provide adequate protection and improvement of the environment. But on the other side, we should not forget that through fulfilling this mission, we are in fact providing conditions for secure, healthy and peaceful development. Fighting for natural resources has frequently been one of the main reasons for conflicts, wars in the past. So we should never again put ourselves in the position to repeat mistakes. The Republic of Macedonia has identified several key priorities for its future development, where achieved EU membership can be considered as the overriding strategic policy objectives. In this context, in the field of climate change, our country aligned its position to the EU ones. But our country, as a non-Annex I country under the UNFCCC, shares common responsibilities under Convention and contributes towards the common goal to stabilize atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases based on differential responsibilities. With the second national communication on climate change based on vulnerability assessment, the most vulnerable sectors were identified in the Republic of Macedonia. Also, some predictions of future vulnerability in economic terms were assessed. It is recommended that the future assessments of economic losses caused by climate change need to be developed. Also, inclusion of social component with possible inclusion of migration caused by impact on climate change on water or agriculture has to be further considered. I sincerely believed that by mitigation of climate change and their effects on the environment, we are contributing to the human being objective, providing secure and peaceful conditions for present and future generations. Thank you. Thank you, Vantage.
Thank you very much. Well, a couple of speakers have mentioned Central Asia, and therefore we're extremely fortunate to have with us today Alzan Braliev, who's Deputy Minister of Environment Protection, Deputy Minister of Environment Protection for Kazakhstan. Prior to holding this position, Mr. Braliev studied in the United States at Harvard and has also served as an advisor to the Prime Minister of Kazakhstan. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, allow me to thank the recipient country, Slovenia, and the municipal administration of Bled for holding such an important forum and for raising vital issues. Day after day, it is becoming more obvious that environment, prosperity, and safety is one of the most important competitive advantages in the world. It seems that there is no need to convince anybody in necessity of having careful attitude towards the nature, since the history of the 20th century that was overwhelmed with the facts of technogenic cataclysms gives good examples to the whole mankind. However, well-known existing contradiction of the business intention to get maximum benefit at minimum expenses often creates obstacles for environmental initiatives of the countries. Stability of climate is one of the most important aspects of sustainable development, and there is no need to repeat that climate change that takes place due to the greenhouse effect is the problem of the global scale and has potential threat to the global environment and prosperity. The humankind already feels that climate change leads to escalation of number of tropical and dust storms, hurricanes, meltdowns of glaciers, dry out of rivers, water basins, as well as to other unfavorable nature phenomena. And as it was stated by one of the speakers yesterday, we are all interrelated, interdependent. The environment does not have borders, and hence unresolved ecological challenges in our country sooner or later not in our country, but in any country, sooner or later will lead to appearance of echoing challenges in others. Kazakhstan has also felt the effect of climate change, warming. Abnormal air temperatures negatively influence agriculture, environment, and health of population. According to the models of modern climate evolution, Kazakhstan may anticipate further change in the air temperature, which can cause shifting in nature zones and leading to further land degradation and desertification. The Republic of Kazakhstan actively partakes in the international negotiations and dialogues dedicated to climate change prevention and mitigation of its consequences. Having the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change ratified in May 1995 and the Kyoto Protocol signed in March 1999, Kazakhstan currently is in the process of ratifying the Kyoto Protocol. Today it is obvious that the key to solving climate change problem lays in the perspectives on transition to sustainable development. That is precisely what the President of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, said at Johannesburg World Summit. Sustainable development is not simply the set of words, but the formula of human survival. On the 14th of November 2006, the concept of Kazakhstan transition to sustainable development till 2024 was approved by the presidential decree. This document for the first time identifies sustainable development as the state priority policy. For the first time, specific targeted indicators on economic, socio-demographic, and environmental aspects of development were set. The implementation of the concept is aimed at further economic growth of the country with increase of effectiveness in natural resources use and decrease of influence on environment and climate. The concept foresees creation of transboundary zones of sustainable development by eco-basin principle, which will facilitate solutions for environmental problems and climate stability. Solutions. Kazakhstan already took the efforts in cooperation with China and Kyrgyz Republic in establishing the first of such zones in the basin of Ili River and Balkhash and Alako lakes. Should mention that in the recent presidential address to the nation, New Kazakhstan and the New World, specific tasks on quantitative and qualitative breakthrough of the national economy in the conditions of increasing international competitiveness are identified. That includes a necessity to form effective legislative base for rational use of natural resources and more effective use of renewable resources of energy. In 2007, Ecological Code was adopted in Kazakhstan, which harmonizes national environmental legislation with the best international practice. The code introduced the articles that legally set environmental basics of sustainable development and the separate chapter dedicated to greenhouse gas emissions regulation. Reaching the ambitious goal of Kazakhstan in entering the number of 50 most competitive countries of the world requires energy sector recovery, most advanced new technologies, and development of alternative resources of energy, solar, wind, geothermal, and others. The strategy of effective and rational use of renewable resources of energy has been drafted in Kazakhstan. Our country has enormous potential of wind, solar, geothermal energy, and the specific task is set of increasing in 250 times a share of alternative sources of energy in overall energy consumption by the year 2024. That should significantly decrease greenhouse gas emissions. Another important program, the state program 30 Corporate Leaders, also has been recently drafted and adopted in our country. And all projects under this program will be aimed at creation of enterprises with high level of energy effectiveness, with minimum greenhouse gas emissions. And as it was mentioned here, quite acute remain the issues and challenges related to water. I should say that to further develop and disseminate innovative projects, it is planned to establish Eurasian Center of Water in Kazakhstan and Solar Center on renewable sources of energy. Being partially in Asia and partially in Europe, Kazakhstan undertakes actions in uniting European and Asian processes of sustainable development into Eurasian one. Within this framework, and the framework of this goal, it is planned to host in the capital of Kazakhstan, Astana, the next conference of ministers of environment, economy and social protection of the Asian Pacific region in 2010, and the next Environment for Europe conference in 2011. And if you allow me to say that we would be honored if a decision is taken to organize the next World Summit on Sustainable Development in Kazakhstan, whenever it takes place in 2012 or 2017. By all means, where the issues of reaching climate safety via sustainable development could be in the agenda. Finishing my speech, I would like to say that in the modern world, each individual should deeply perceive his or her own responsibility in saving our common home, the planet Earth, for living and for future generation. Please allow me to express assurance that the world society possesses sufficient possibilities of addressing acute modern challenges and solving problems for mitigating climate change, as well as facilitating transfer to sustainable development on the global scale. The question is, can we use these possibilities properly? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, Denmark has the responsibility next year of getting a deal on the post-Kyoto landscape for climate change. And here to tell us how they're going to do it is Stefan Schmidt, who's ambassador for the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs on climate change. And since entering the Danish Foreign Affairs Ministry in 1973, he's held a series of top positions in Copenhagen, in Brussels and elsewhere, including at the OECD and UNESCO, where he was ambassador. Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this important panel. It is true, moderator, that we have an immense task in front of us. Denmark is hosting the conference in December 2009. I hope that others will also help us to bring that conference to a successful conclusion. If I may, I think I'd rather like to concentrate on a few that I consider central questions on the link between climate change and security. Honestly, I do believe that we are only at the beginning of being able to analyze fully the security consequences of climate change. I hope it is fair to say that there is an increasing understanding of the consequences of the climate change in general, including the fact that much of the damage is man-made nowadays. But as Margaret Beckett just said, I think the real problem is, first and foremost, whether we can master the necessary political will and the resources to tackle it. But one thing is to tackle climate change as such and the effect that it has on society. A different thing is to look upon it as a security question. Allow me first and foremost to ask the question, is the security risks that climate change can create, are they mainly situated outside Europe, or are there immediate threats to Europe itself? I think we have a tendency to look at the security risk as something happening outside the frontiers of Europe, and the excellent report to which that has been referred by Solana and the Commission at the beginning of this year is mainly focusing on the different kind of risks that one could identify in different regions of the world outside Europe's shores. But are there direct threats to Europe as such? Or are they mainly the threats that we have to confront, indirect threats from such other possible risks and emanating risks in the parties around Europe? The second question, I think it is important, one in particular, is whether the risks that we are identifying tend to be risks that reinforce already existing tensions and risks that we have around us. And a number of examples that have been mentioned, I think, fall in that category. The problems that have been referred to definitely on land and on water are problems that we know of already. Do we have to address them in a different way? And is the magnitude of the problem such that we will raise other very important questions for us to take care of the security consequences of such risks? Do they change in nature to such an extent that we have to tackle them in a different way? Are there other risks who are genuinely new risks created by climate change? Well, there may be some that we could refer to as possible such new risks, including the consequences of the melting of the polar ice, which will in itself create some new situations, both in terms of access to resources, but also in the context of opening new maritime routes, for example, in the Arctic area. And if so, how do we address them? Or, for example, are the risks of the rising water levels in parts of the world not only reinforcing the kind of risks that we have already seen some of the effects of, to the extent even that some smaller island state might virtually disappear with all the consequences that that could have? Again, if so, are we addressing those questions in a different way as a risk question rather than as a catastrophe in itself with the means that we have at our disposal? And my final main question would be, to what extent should we consider necessary changes to the multilateral framework to attack or handle the risks in front of us? Some of the means we know of, and they have been referred to, including by Margaret Beckett, on the need for massive increase in definitely in development aid. But do we actually, with the kind of risk we have in front of us, also have to look to other possible changes to the institutional framework in the international community? Do we need new tools to address these threats being multiplied of existing, or be they new threats in front of us? There may be other major questions, but these seem to me to be some of the more important questions that we have to address. And with all your indulgence, I think actually we are only at an early phase of identifying the full risks and tension in front of us due to the security risk and tensions in front of us due to climate change, whereas we nowadays are much more acquainted to address climate change issues as such. And frankly, I'm one of those who belong to those who believe that we know what we have to do to attack climate change. But the question is whether we can master, as was referred to, the necessary political will and resources to do it. But do we know fully what the security risk in front of us? I'm not sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you to all our speakers for being so admirably disciplined and leaving a good period of time for discussion. Let's now open the floor to you. If you have specific questions for individuals here, please make that clear. And if you could also identify yourselves as well. Anybody like to start? Well, excellent. That leaves me with the task of doing so. And as a journalist, I always enjoy that. If I could start with a couple of questions, just to get this going. With Mr. Ruppel, for Mr. Ruppel, are you a little bit disappointed in the fact that since March, since that paper, Solana paper, went to the heads of government, this subject seems to have disappeared slightly from the agenda? And if I could also just ask Mr. Braliev, people were talking here about the problem of water in Central Asia, and I think there was a point made by Mr. Richambeau that there is no regional cooperation organisation there. Is there anything moving on that you could perhaps suggest? So if we could start with those two questions.
Thank you. Now, I remember when Solana report was put on the agenda of the March European Council, I remember some sort of hesitation or some sort of lack of enthusiasm as far as this report was concerned, because some people said, well, but this doesn't really belong here. Maybe it should be presented somewhere else. I remember it was presented at the dinner of the prime ministers. Are we sure that the two are connected, climate change and security? And well, afterwards there was no big discussion. This was a presentation, and afterwards there was no big discussion. Exactly what Margaret has said. This is not really perhaps the most imminent, the most pressing issue that we have to handle. We have other things to discuss. We have, I don't know, it was Western Balkans, it was EU-Russia relations, it was transatlantic relations, and all kinds of I would say, classical foreign policy issues and security issues that we are more, so it seems, and I'm sorry to say so, more interested in than this particular report and this particular issue. So you have asked me whether I'm disappointed. There is not enough disappointment, I would say. We are not as disappointed as we should be, perhaps. Thank you.
Speaking about the water challenge in Central Asia, it's there, and as absolutely correctly Mr. Brichambault mentioned, that unfortunately the water becomes the tool of interest of many parties. In order, let me step back. Also, Mr. Brichambault mentioned that it is obvious that if any proper measures or steps are taken, then we could surely anticipate any upcoming crisis or some kind of disturbances in the region. Why not? Then the question is what an international community, the countries themselves, can do in order to prevent this conflict, if we already know. Yesterday we talked about the fact that the conflict was known for a certain period of time, but nothing has been done. What the international society can do in order not to do the same mistake. Technically speaking, this issue has been at the table for quite a period of time. You know that at the previous conference in Belgrade, in cope with Central Asian countries, we suggested the initiatives, which actually was also supported at Kyiv, the Central Asian Initiative, that one of the major tasks of which is the proper management of ecosystems of the region, as well as the water. I also mentioned in my presentation that there are some initiatives taken in creating a Eurasian Center for Water that would be providing studies and certain research of how the water should be treated in the region. By all means, the issue of water should be treated at the multifaceted level. Various players and interested parties should be involved into the negotiation about this issue, because solving this challenge bilaterally often is an unaccomplishable task. And the truth is on the both sides of the fence. You absolutely correctly mentioned that for some countries, with the growing economy, it's important to use more resources to provide security in their region. For other countries, it is also important to have the access to water in order to provide it to population and to use it for other purposes. So where is the truth? Which side of the fence is more attractive? I don't think that we should choose sides of the fence, but rather internationally approach with the well-working mechanisms of how these challenges could be tackled.
Gentleman here.
Roger Williamson from Wilton Park, the Foreign Office Conference Centre. Thank you. Roger Williamson from the Foreign Office Conference Centre, Wilton Park in the UK. I'd like to ask initially Marc Brichambault a question. And it really leads on from some of the comments that Mrs. Beckett made. Professor Buzan in one of the London universities has said that if you securitise an issue, make it a security concern, first of all you push it up the agenda so that the president or the head of state has to deal with it. But secondly, you inevitably distort the issue. Do you think there's a danger of that with the climate change issue, particularly, for example, as relating to water? Because one of the conferences that we had indicated that many states are aware that if you fall out over something as fundamental as water, then you're in very serious difficulties. And if you try to deal with that through a military or security approach, that's probably going to be more dangerous and less effective than dealing with it at a scientific and technical and environmental and diplomatic level. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much. I think the question you raised had been mentioned, which is the adequacy of international fora to deal with, as you say, the sort of multifaceted problems, because the security fora have a tradition on their own. They're based on a historical experience. The people who work there have a certain type of expertise, and the people who work on environmental and climate change fora come from a completely different background, and there is a certain discrepancy in the work of, no overlap in the work of the two families, if I may say, who have different bureaucratic roots in states at home. And therefore, you're right that when an issue like this becomes a security issue, it enters into a world which has its own rules, which have not yet adapted to this reality. And therefore, one of the challenges clearly that has to be addressed is how to create a continuum between the sort of the intellectual and policy roots of the environmental side and the potential consequences on the political and security side. And I think Minister Braliev just mentioned one such approach, because it has to go through the national bureaucracy first in each of the countries, and then be translated into a sort of continuous flow which makes policy determination possible. Intellectual input, policy decisions at home, the creations of tools for cooperation, and devising the appropriate tools for cooperation, which are very, very complex. We mentioned water, but there are many other issues which could be mentioned in terms of protecting the environment and creating the conditions to mitigate climate change. So this is really a new field, which I'm sure Wilton Park is going to explore very soon.
I'd like to offer a view on that. It does seem quite a central question whether the multilateral system can really deal with this. Is the UN the right forum? Mr. Ruppel, Mrs. Beckett, anybody?
Well, in a sense, it seems to me the UN's the only forum. Exactly how you do it. And I take the point entirely about, yes, making it a security issue is the only way to get it onto the agenda of most heads of state, and that is where it needs to be. But yes, of course, there is a danger in that as well. And I think Mark is right to talk about a continuum of interests. And the point has been made that tackling it through environmental and diplomatic channels and so on is in many ways the right way to solve some of the practical issues which will arise, but you have to get the push to give those people any power, any opportunity to get together and have those negotiations. So in some way it is bound to be United Nations linked, precisely because this is a problem on such a scale. The climate change specifics of it are very much a matter for the United Nations Convention. But I think the thing that has always struck me about it is two things about, first of all, that we do need unprecedented international cooperation. That is, to me, beyond dispute. So how do we get that? And by tackling it on things like a regional basis where people can see mutual interests in common and see some of the advantages. Reference has already been made to the fact that the changes in the Arctic are likely to open up new waterways, and there will be benefits from that, just as there will be problems. But the other thing that it seems to me that we need to try to do is to create an unprecedented public-private partnership. And if you go back to the precedent of the ozone layer and of the Montreal Protocol, what happened was that governments finally identified there is actually a genuine problem here. The scientists may be right. Maybe there is a real risk. Set some fairly simple goals that, well, what can we do to mitigate this, and let the private sector get on with it. And in fact, it was achieved faster and more effectively than anybody had at the time predicted. So I think this is doable, and Nick Stern's economic report suggests that although it might cost of the order of 1% of the world's GDP, which is not a small sum, I appreciate, to tackle the problem, not tackling it will cost us anywhere between 5 and 20 times as much. So it's getting the impetus behind getting the relevant technical and diplomatic and so on moves going. So I don't know whether we need... I'm always cautious when somebody says, oh, let's set up a new body. You can spend an awful lot of time, energy and money setting up new bodies. How do we use the ones we've got?
We had another question here. Sorry, the gentleman in the second row.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Simon Blakey from Cambridge Energy Research Associates. May I say, before anything, that I'm very impressed with both the calibre and the focus of this debate. It's very often the case that generals are accused of fighting the last war. Here we have a set of generals whose eyes are clearly fixed on something that may be the next war, and that's not something we don't very often get. So I'm very impressed and would like to thank you all. I'm also struck by the intractability of the problem, which isn't susceptible to bilateral problems that may not be susceptible to bilateral solutions, and problems with the multilateral architecture that have been mentioned. Does that imply that perhaps we need to think widely and think differently and think about some prospect of regional policemen, if you like, for a particular set of individual climate-related issues, if we have Central Asian water problems or Latin American problems, and the international community neither has the architecture nor the political will to interfere in each particular case, rather than see a set of conflagrations arising around the place? Would it be worthwhile the UN looking at who is the regional power, who is potentially most interested, and who can actually have some leverage, and move forward along rather unconventional lines to think about ways in which that might be developed? An idea I toss out.
Anybody particularly like to come in on that? International architecture? That was Mr. Schmidt, you think?
Well, thank you. I certainly don't think I have the answer to the question, but I have to admit that even if I certainly do agree that the UN is the overall framework, I must say I do think that we at the same time have to consider carefully whether the UN framework is sufficient to produce the kind of an international agreement that we were looking for at the end. I'm not talking about necessarily a result of the Copenhagen conference in 2009, where we hopefully will establish the main elements of a post-2012 regime on climate change. I talk more in terms of overall measures needed to implement whatever you can arrive at. So I must say, I belong to one of those who are fundamentally skeptical about whether we have an international system at the moment who can manage not only the question of arriving at the correct international conclusions, but definitely subsequently of putting such measures through in a way which is sufficiently effective considering the issues we are debating. Frankly, let me say, when you look to the details of what we're discussing in the UN framework at the moment, the details of how we can handle such specific economic and technical issues we are addressing, you will have to ask the question whether the international community has the necessary means. I'm not looking for creating new bodies. I'm certainly not in favor of that. But nevertheless, we have to address that question. Look to how difficult it is for the European community, within the community, to agree on the measures to put in place to live up to the commitments we made more than a year ago. Even if among the 27 you have difficulties in arriving at the necessary specific means to do it, I think the magnitude of the problem for the international community as a whole is quite stark, isn't it? Thank you.
Just if I could just ask, sorry, I was going to ask Mr. Ruppel, but also then Mr. Breliev would like to come in on this. I mean, is the multilateral system up to it at the moment? Are the institutions that we have capable of dealing with the scale of this threat?
Well, on one hand, I don't see any other system than United Nations. But I guess that somebody has to lead, and I guess that the EU is in the position to have this leading role. And between the EU and United Nations there is some distance, but let's start running. I think that's what I can say at this point. I think that in the EU we are quite conscious of the dimension of the problem. We have said we want reduction of gas emissions. We want a major share of renewables. We want to go to Copenhagen and other conferences and other meetings with clear commitments. Well, we have to do it now.
Thanks. I think Mr. Breliev wanted to come in.
I don't know whether I want to say it anymore. Please excuse me if I sound too infantile, but I think the world will be a better place when we won't have any policemen or big brothers. I guess, ideally, I don't know, in hypothetical future, if all people could genuinely treat the problem that faces all of us, not just finding the solutions that, somebody will regulate this issue or somebody will constrain me if I do something wrong. Unless we have such an approach in thinking, then we will always have continuous problems. I don't know how to choose global mentality, but being sort of idealist, maybe speaking in the frames of utopia a little bit, when I was talking about the mechanisms, that should be a genuine approach to the problem from all parties, without prevailing any interests. And when I was saying that bilateral agreements do not work, I'm not putting the cross on it and that we should not do that. I'm saying that often it doesn't work in the real conditions and real circumstances. Because, as again, referring to what Mr. Brichambault said, that there is a truth on the both sides of the fence. How can you approach it? And bilaterally solving this issue is practically impossible sometimes.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Asha Rose Migiro. I'm the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. I just wanted to contribute to the point that was raised on the role of the United Nations and what possibilities there are tackling the problem through the UN. I do believe, as most of you have said, that the United Nations may not be the only platform, but I think it is one of the important platforms that brings this agenda to the multilateral forum. And we've already seen the leadership that has been taken by the Secretary General facilitating the intergovernmental process through the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. But that alone is not enough. We need to get the support of regional bodies. And I think what is happening here in Slovenia is one of the fora that can contribute. Definitely, climate change is a global problem. It goes beyond borders, and therefore it needs global solutions. This includes governments, other partners, non-governmental partners, and we have seen how successful this forum has been building the partnership between government and, for instance, the corporate world and other players. So I believe that the United Nations should continue, and we are happy that we are continuing to do that, to bring parties together. And it is not only the intergovernmental process that the Secretary General is striving to support, but also other key players, non-governmental, philanthropic societies, and civil societies as well. Whether climate change should be elevated to the security level. We know that climate change and energy crisis do have multifaceted perspectives, and therefore all perspectives have to be brought to the table. There has been a question whether climate change should be a security issue. That is a debatable point, but it poses problems to security, be it physical, geographical, food security, energy security, and I think we should approach the climate change in all its phases. This is what I thought I should say, and the United Nations is ready to do that role, and we're grateful for the support that we are receiving from governments, from leaders, and the Secretary General has continued to engage leadership, not only from the developed but also the developing world, because we know that that is the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just pick up on that question, we're of multilateral international institutions and the multilateral system, and perhaps ask Mr. Richambeau, I mean, wherever you look at the moment, the multilateral system is in a bit of crisis. WTO has had its recent failure. If you look at the security organizations, Mr. Medvedev in Russia says that neither NATO nor the OSCE is working. We need something new. The UN is challenged. The EU has its own problems with the Lisbon Treaty. What are you doing wrong in the multilateral system there?
Well, I would be very direct with you. The multilateral system is as good as its components. In other words, it reflects the state of international society. If you have doubts about how well it works, that it is because the actors themselves are having trouble with each other. I'm sorry to say so. The multilateral system, all of us who serve it, try to implement mandates we have received, values we have been asked to serve, and provide inputs. And in the issue which we're addressing now, I think the whole UN family has done a remarkable job. And earlier, Dimitri was saying, act locally, think globally. There is a lot the multilateral institutions have done everywhere at the regional or sub-regional level to try and address the problems we are mentioning today. And the global role is the one that is expected from the UN. It is a forum where the components meet, including the NGO community, which is very important, the private sector, which has been referred to, which is absolutely crucial. But it is also the place where the policies have to be devised on the basis of an increased awareness, and ultimately the policies are implemented by the key actors, states, private sector, NGOs. It's complex, but this is the world we are in.
I think we had a question at the back. Yes. Oh, sorry, it was...
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm the Greek ambassador, Denis Kondoureas, to Slovenia. I fully agree that global solutions, for global solutions, long-term strategy is absolutely necessary, and synergy and cooperation of international institutions. But, of course, this process takes time. In the meantime, I would like to ask you if there is room for better use of the existing structures and processes and players in order to, let us say, solve some acute problems, especially in the countries under development. I pose you this question because I personally believe that the developed world, the developed countries, have some very important and efficient means to promote now, not tomorrow, some solutions of great importance for countries and peoples. Allow me to give you a very characteristic example from my experience from Africa. Development aid. In my personal view, there is a need, an urgent need, to establish a strong linkage between development process and development aid in terms of protection of national environment. I think that there is a lot of room to have some concrete results. Thank you very much.
And on that, perhaps Mr. Jacobi?
Okay. The ambassador of Greece initiated me. The problems of climate change maybe can be the one of reasons and the themes which we're going to make to cooperate each others in the regions and the states which have the political problems, or in the past they were in war between them. When the people in those regions hear so that there will be problems about climate changes, like the problems which were in the wars in the past, and they say, not again. So come on and let cooperate and let take the steps and do something in this moment for those problems. And I invite the minister, the ambassador of Greece, let's do something together, and the others from the region, of course. Thank you.
We had a question at the back, I think.
My name is Alexander Müller. I'm Assistant Director General at FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations. But first of all, I would like to thank the panelists for giving us this overview. There seems to be a consensus that on the one hand, climate change is an issue for security. On the other hand, that the security bodies are not really prepared for such a discussion. And I'm not really surprised. Margaret will remember when environmental issues were brought to the attention of the Agricultural Council in Brussels. It was the same. Environment and agriculture were divided for a long time. Security and environment were divided for a long time. So what we are seeing now is the start of a new discussion. We had with the IPCC and the Fourth Assessment Report and all this very, very good work, we have a fundamental basis for addressing what are the impacts of climate change. But what we do not have is a political assessment. What are the consequences for some of the countries? And this is quite a difficult job because you have to identify hotspots. Hotspots in areas of the world where the situation today is difficult. We know that the population will increase over the next 40 years by 3 billion, all in developing countries, all in urban areas, and nobody talks about most of the population increase will happen in areas where climate change will have a severe impact. So if we try to discuss water, food, social stability, we have to identify hotspots. And for the international community, identifying hotspots is a tough political task. So what I think, similar to what the IPCC has done, we have to create a consensus. What could be the implications of climate change on stability, on security, and on peace? Without having such a consensus, we will have very good and interesting debates, but every conflict in the world will be on top of the agenda, and we will forget the midterm and long-term consequences of climate change. I've made a similar experience when I had the pleasure to organize this high-level conference in Rome in June on climate change and world food security. The idea from the beginning was to look at the midterm and long-term consequences of climate change and what's the impact on food security. Since the beginning, 2008, rising food prices were on top of the agenda. And of course, every politician, and we had 43 heads of states, they had to concentrate on things which are urgent today and tomorrow. And the idea of looking in the future, what will happen in sub-Saharan Africa in 2030, with decreasing yields for some of the crops, and what are the implications for social stability there, is not on top of the agenda. So my proposal is not only to ask the question, is the international multilateral system ready, or do we need a new body? I don't think we need a new body. What we have to do is consensus building and try to work on a shared assessment, what are the implications? And this will be a challenge for both sides, for the environmental sides and for the security side, because until now there was not a clear connection and there was not a good discussion. So it's a challenge for both sides.
Thank you. It's one of the themes here, that subjects that have been discussed as long-term problems for many years suddenly start becoming very short-term problems. Food price rises, extreme weather events. Mr. Ruppel, how do you think you really get politicians at the highest level, prime ministers, foreign ministers like yourself, to concentrate on issues which are beneath the surface but are not the really pressing subject of the day? How do you get that?
With some difficulty. As has been said, I mean, well, I'm in a special situation because we shall have elections in Slovenia in 3 weeks' time. So we are really, burdened with issues that are of different character. But I mean, to be serious, I think that we are not in such a bad position today as we used to be, let's say, a year or two ago, because now we have already some experience and some, I would say, some possibility to discuss issues with substantial issues with some materials in hand. As you remember, during the German presidency, some very pertinent documents have been produced. Conclusions, the Council conclusions are there. Then during our presidency, those conclusions have been radicalized, so to say. Now, the extreme weather events have somehow underlined the necessity of such discussions. So we are not as lost in space as we were, let's say, 3-4 years ago. It's getting better. Now the chance is to have a substantial discussion on climate change issues. These conditions have changed to the better. Of course, the situation is getting worse. And once the situation is getting worse, of course, we are more motivated to have pertinent discussions. But as I said, politicians are so much preoccupied with the election calendars and this short-term interest that sometimes we lose the motivation to think and to speak about climate change every day, which we should.
Margaret, you've been in cabinet for many years in Britain. Does government really give politicians the chance to think about the proper problems? I mean, I'm also struck at the EU level. The Gymnich meetings, foreign affairs ministers always have informal meetings every 6 months where they're supposed to go away and think really what the challenges are. But as soon as they come back into their national or even international framework, it's the pressing problems. How is there no time really to think about the real problems?
I think there can be, and I think all governments, from time to time, actually create the space in which to do some long-term thinking. And part of what I think the international debate has to try to do is to make sure that when governments come to the point, which, for example, the Slovenian government will, after their election, they will take stock. Okay, we're a new government. What do we do? You identified this is when climate change has to be on the agenda, when governments do create space, do start thinking in the long term. Listening to all of this, the thing that runs through it, I mean, the Greek ambassador said that, raised the issue of development. And it seems to me this is very much at the heart of all of it. And this is why the World Trade Organization failure is linked to all of this. Because if you look at the progress of development aid over the past, it's been a series of undelivered promises. And even those promises that have been delivered in many parts of the world are being rendered nugatory by climate change. The investment that's been made is worthless. And yet, what are the pressures that then suddenly land on the agenda, say, of European ministers? Migration is absolutely a key one. What is most likely to drive migration? Not being able to feed the population where they live, not being able to have water where they live, the land that they used to farm no longer being viable. This is all there, bubbling up, and from time to time will break the surface. And it seems to me so crystal clear that if we want to preempt those things before they've bubbled up and become a catastrophe, then we have to pursue effective development. The Millennium Development Goals, yes, but taking account of all of this. A long time ago, a Chinese ambassador to Britain said to me that when you are the leader of China, and China is in many ways one of the most advanced countries in thinking about this, and this may be why. When you're the leader of China, when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you think is, can I feed my people today? It doesn't matter whether they call you emperor or president. And it's a huge problem. And it's not because you're a lovely human being, although you may be, but it's because if you can't feed your people today, my God, are you in trouble? And that is going to be the dilemma of lots and lots of different leaders in different kinds of countries across the world. When we had that assessment that Alexander spoke of about the impact of climate change on agriculture in Europe, it was raised earlier, the security implications for Europe, and people tend to talk as if it's, the Central Asian countries and the links with Europe and so on. Yeah, all true. But there will be desertification in Europe. There will be farming land that is no longer viable in Europe, the Europe of today. These are tomorrow's problems, but tomorrow is not as far away as people think.
Thanks. Any questions? One over there.
Thank you. My name is Pierre Guimond, the ambassador of Canada to Slovenia. And thank you for the organizers to have put a polar bear on the marketing tools. Bears are in dire strait, as you know, because there was getting less and less ice for them to go on the Arctic Sea and hunt. So even rich countries have problems. Ms. Beckett just mentioned desertification in Europe, including maybe difficulties on the ski slopes of Slovenia in the years to come. In Canada, we'll have too much moisture coming up. So we'll have flooding, and of course the ice cap is melting. But my main point is that democracy is sometimes an answer to those kind of security issues. Democracies do not make wars on one another. And I have a friend here from Denmark, so we can testify that we have a small conflict between us, called Hans Island, which is about 1 square kilometer. And the Danes put some Heineken beer and we put some maple syrup on it from time to time. But we've been negotiating on this for some time. And these are ways that matters are resolved. It's also bilateral. There's a need for multilateral institutions. Sometime in Europe we have the feeling that there's a great appetite for institutionalizing everything. But bilateral relationship is also a way to get out of that. We, in Canada, our Prime Minister just announced last week that we're going to double to 200 nautical miles the area on which we will administer environmental laws, which is interesting because how to address environmental issues on the Arctic Sea if you let all kind of a free-for-all situation without regulations taking place. So it's a matter of national sovereignty, but it's also an issue of protection of the environment. And when the North Sea Passage are open on both sides, on the Russian side and Canadian side, then something has to be done about that. And in Canada, we're doing that right now. So with international cooperation, good bilateral relations between democracies, there's ways to get out of those concerns that are coming with environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I can ask the gentleman here.
Thank you very much. It's more a comment than a question, actually. It is quite clear that we have a coming anarchy in many senses when it comes to the question of saving the planet. And obviously we already have agreements, international organizations, criteria, Copenhagen, that can, in theory, handle those issues. We also know the is as functional as its components, and Mr. Birchenbauer said it perfectly, are willing to use it and work through the system to solve the problem. And behind that state interest, the sovereignty issue, of course, there is a profit. And behind the profit there is money and technology progress. To me, the turning point of this in this vicious circle could only be if the public interest, the raison of the state, can match with the profit interest to save the earth in a profitable manner, so that we work together, the public and the private interest, in producing the safe environment, enough food for everybody, enough cheap food, enough clean water, enough resources for a growing population. Thank you.
Mr. Ruppel, you have to leave in a few minutes. Maybe you'd just like to respond perhaps to those 2 points and then sum up anything from the conclusions today before you go off to meet EU leaders in Brussels.
Well, I was just thinking of whatever the Croatian ambassador has said. Now, I think that more and more we are in the situation that we like each other more than we used to, and that we are prepared to work together more than we used to. We have common problems that we can only resolve together. For instance, I was thinking about the ecological problems of the Adriatic, for instance. It is not a pressing issue at this point, but it may be coming. And there have been initiatives in the past, to introduce ecological protection zones and so on and so on. This was also mentioned by the Canadian ambassador. I think that we can be successful if we work together, not just Croatia and Slovenia, or Croatia and Italy, or Slovenia and Italy, but Croatia and Italy and Slovenia and Bosnia and Albania and everybody else in the vicinity. And I think that actually what is going on today is that we are being brought together many more and in a much more natural way than in the past. And of course the situation is worsening, but this worsening situation and this feeling of danger, of common danger, I think it's bringing us together. And I guess that multilateralism has a better future than at any time in the past. That's perhaps one of the ideas that comes out of this debate. I thank you very much, Mr. Castle, for your splendid role and function in this panel. I really have to leave now. I think that, we have contributed here at Bled and in Slovenia a little bit to the awareness of the problems that exist and that have been discussed here. And if we have moved a few inches, the whole debate, if we have raised awareness a little bit, I think we have done a good job. Thank you very much. I have to go.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have a few more minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Rupel. We have a few more minutes. Yes, perhaps half an hour, up to half an hour. If there are more questions or comments, maybe I'll take 2 or 3, and then we can distribute them around the panel. Gentlemen.
Yeah. We would like to say something. We're from China World Peace Foundation. Mr. Li is the chairman of China World Peace Foundation. We would like to thank you for the panel, and also we really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this event. We would like to express our opinion.
由于地理板块和资源储备的不平衡，政治经济技术的区别，文化差异，信息不对称，使国际气候合作的步伐滞后于污染侵蚀的速度，使世界和平受到了威胁。
Yeah, we can see the climate changes have made the world peace under threat due to the imbalance, geographic plate in the energy resources, and the differences in the politics and the economic and the technology, as well as cultural information vary. We have already delayed our effort to improve the global climate condition. That is also make us fall far behind the progress of the environmental pollution.
既然大家共同生活在一个地球上，我们就应该把国际气候合作看作为建设和维护世界和平的项目，看作一个国际大超市，发展环境友好城市和友好行业，把共同利益与区域个体利益紧密结合起来，把资金、资源、技术、信息等有效地进入市场流通，看作为系统工程，责权利要挂钩。
Yeah, since we're living on the same Earth, we must consider the protecting and improving global climate as a project of maintaining the world peace. Based upon the world-wide supermarket model, what we considered, we should consider our common, regional, and individual interests at the same time, and try to establish some friendly environmental cities relationship in the problem regional areas. We should best utilize our financial and the natural resources, technologies, and information in the worldwide marketplace. We should also systematically structure our economy, energy resources, and environmental control so that responsibility, obligation, and interest will become integral parts to each other. And according to the international law, we should establish the principle of a common trust, coordination, mutual benefit, and interest. By doing so, there will be less conflict and more love. To unite all of the forces and resources, we also should encourage the involvement of non-government investment and technology support.
以国际规则为基础，建立互信 互助、互惠、互利的原则，少一分对抗，多一分爱，团结一切可以团结的力量，鼓励非政府的技术与资金的介入，确立和平和谐的国际政治经济新秩序。
In the proposed worldwide supermarket concept under the collectivism environment, a new international politics and economic orders should be established under peace and harmony.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else like another question before we... no, well, in that case, I'd like to just reframe that contribution slightly with putting it in a broader context and ask our panel whether they believe that there really is a consensus outside Europe. We've just heard from China about the importance of climate change. I'm thinking, for example, occasionally one hears comments from Russia that climate change isn't all bad, that in fact it'll affect parts of Siberia in a positive way. Do we think that global consensus, or are we somewhat deceiving ourselves here in Europe? Anybody like to come in on that? Mr. Schmidt?
I think I have to come in on that one, don't I? With the kind of responsibilities that we have. Well, I don't think that we in Europe are deceiving ourselves in this. On the contrary, but I do feel that it is fair to say that a sufficient consensus, not only of the nature of the problems involved, but certainly of the character, the kind of solutions that we're looking to, is, in my view, not at a sufficient level at this stage. And of course, with our role as hosting the conference in 2009, we fear that there isn't a sufficient momentum in the international society as a whole to move forward toward what we consider to be the necessary solution, with the consequences that could have. Now, the Danish government is doing its utmost, of course, to participate in all different ways of awareness raising. But it is quite obvious that if we don't see a sufficient taking responsibility in different parts of the world, not only in Europe, it will be very difficult to arrive to the conclusion that we would hope we could arrive at. I'd like to pick up on an example that Margaret Beckett just mentioned, on development aid. Even there, I think we in our part of the world will have to look more careful to what we're doing ourselves. Living up to the Millennium Development Goal in itself is a difficult thing, and we definitely haven't done so at the pace that we would need. And on top of that, we know that we are confronted with a desire, and even if I suspect at the end of the day, a political request from the developing world that we should not only live up to the Millennium Development Goals as they stand at the moment, we should take upon our shoulders an additional contribution in development in order to contribute to tackle the problems particularly linked to climate change. I'm sure this is going to be one of the demands in which we'll be confronted with at the preparations to the conference in 2009. I'm not sure at all that our part of the world will be ready to respond to that in a sufficient way. In addition, if I may add, I think we should be quite aware of the fact that the kind of financial resources necessary in different parts of the world, only the developing countries, the poorest of them, will be of a magnitude that is way beyond what we would be able to take care of, even in the development aid. So that part of it, where development aid could only be, if you like, a helping hand to foster other more private means, just illustrates how far away, in my view, we still are from being able to provide the necessary solutions to the kind of problems that we're up against. Thank you. Sorry to be so talking.
Maybe, Mr. Jacobi, I could ask you, in Macedonia, how high is this issue on the political agenda? Is there really consciousness of the importance of this, or are other issues more pressing in your political agenda?
Okay, well, we are a small country, and the implications of our country in this problem are not yet very big, and it's yet it's good news from us. But of course, we are trying, and as a ministry and myself, to animate the politicians in this problem, and we are. The main problems we have in the energetic system, and this is there are the emissions, the biggest emissions, but they are still in the frontiers, and the solving of our problem is finding a new energetic sources, and that will contribute to reduce them much more, and that will be very, very fast, and we'll in the next meetings we can declare that we are done in that way more. But the animating of the politicians and the whole opinion is a challenge for us and for me, and I will do it. Thank you.
We have to finish by 11, so we have perhaps one more very quick question, or if not, there's nobody here, perhaps I could just go around the panel and ask them if they could say in a couple of sentences whether they believe the political commitment is there and the money is there to tackle this problem effectively. Perhaps we'll start with Mr. Breliev, and we'll go this way around.
I believe that...
If you can, quite quickly, because we have to...
I believe that the world community come to common understanding. We witnessed that. I believe that the world have efficient financial resources in order to tackle these issues. And since we're talking about the responsibility of living and future generations, let me bring your attention to the fact that our home, planet Earth, has limited resources. Sooner or later, they will be depleted. So it means that the rules of the game should not be just in the field of European Union or some other parts of the world. The rules of the game should be common for the whole world. I mean, I don't know how can we do that, but all various stakes should be discussed, because otherwise, if some of the interests are not taken into considerations, then there will always be a bell that will be ringing from time to time. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Beckett.
I think it is a huge challenge, but if we look back to where we were 3, 4, 5 years ago, the position has been transformed. There isn't enough of a commitment yet, there isn't enough money yet, but as understanding grows, I believe that also can grow. You asked if there's enough of a consensus to get agreement, and it's true that, Russia is quite right, there are advantages for Russia. How soon it'll be before it dawns on them that when the tundra melts, their infrastructure might be at some risk, their roads and so on, and that there are downsides as well as upsides to these changes remains to be seen. But there is much more of a consensus than there was a few years ago. There is the potential for a consensus. And with regard to the issue of resources, which is undoubtedly substantial, I refer again to the Stern report, which I think most people accept has demonstrated quite clearly that the costs of not taking action are infinitely larger than the costs of action. This is a real invest to save project. And we've spoken about development, about the need for that in order to preempt some of these movements of population and so on. Through the mechanisms of tackling climate change, you get that beneficial impact. The clean development mechanism is on a small scale, but it's the thing that's most likely to produce technology transfer of anything I've ever seen in the development world, a lot more than pious exhortation and feelings of moral goodwill towards the poor. Climate change, CDM, gives you mutual benefit, and that is the way that you might get that commitment and resources that you need.
Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, having invited our three panellists to give some concluding remarks, I've now been told that actually we have to bring things to a conclusion. So I'd like to apologize, it's bad timing. It's ironic that I'm the one who's actually mismanaged the time here. But it's I think we can conclude that climate change hasn't gone away. It's a rather gloomy picture in some respects, but a more positive one in other respects, in that politicians here, diplomats, have shown their awareness of this issue and the fact that their comprehension that it can be tackled if the will is there. So I'd like you to thank our distinguished panellists very much indeed, and to apologise again to the three on my left for failing to give them a final word.